Okay, hello and welcome to Ethereum Classic Community Call number 24. Today is June 28th, 2022. It's been a bit of a break since we last had a call, so it feels like now is the time. So thanks everyone for joining us, and we have quite a lot of updates this week, including a chat with Bob Summerwill. So thanks for joining us, Bob. And we'll be splitting the call into two sections. First, we'll be chatting with Bob, and then we'll open up for general discussion and ecosystem updates. As always, this call will be recorded and is probably live streaming now to YouTube, so please be on your best behavior. So yeah, to start up, hey Bob, thanks for joining us.
Greetings, everybody. Hope everyone's good.
Indeed, long time no see. Hope everything is well with you and family as well.
Yes, the summer seems to have finally arrived here in Vancouver. It's been very rainy and crappy, but it has arrived. Hooray.
Yes, I'm currently in Japan at the moment, and it's extremely hot here, so I'm actually looking forward to the summer ending. So yeah, we haven't really had a chat for a while, I guess. So thanks for the recent update in terms of the yearly review, the report, and the roadmap. It was very interesting reading, and we discussed it on a call last time. But it's nice of you to join us so we can dive into some of those points.
Yeah, no problem. And then we're getting to the midway point on the year, so there'll be another update in the next couple of weeks.
Awesome. And just for housekeeping, if anyone wants to jump in, I do have some questions lined up about the report, but feel free to join the chat. It's an open discussion, kind of, but we will try and keep it on the rails to some extent.
Great. So yeah, I don't have a speech to make or a presentation or anything. So if you'd like to drive with questions, that's fine.
Sounds good. So I guess we can start by covering the main points that you mentioned in the blog article, which are the grants, ecosystem grants, updates regarding the treasury, and potentially looking at conferences. So let's start off with the grants program that you mentioned. How is that going to be structured, and have there been any applications so far?
So yeah, haven't announced any details on that yet. The There's some other stuff going on around potential other sources of donation and income that are kind of tied into that. So that's not progressing at the moment because I think it might take a different and broader form. But yeah, at the start of the year, within the budget for the year, 250k was allocated to that, which would be the first sort of grants that we've had for a couple of years. In 2019 and early 2020, there were a few funded activities around that time. But yeah, tail end of 2020 was a pretty fallow time in the market for sure. But yeah, the start of 2020 one, and maybe I'll just talk about the broader financial situation. So for anyone that doesn't know, the co-op was founded in 2017, initially by Grayscale, and then spinning out into its own non-profit legal entity. Through all of that time, the primary funding has come from Grayscale, who run many funds, which are sort of proto ETFs. There's been a lot of news in the last little while with regard to their Bitcoin ETF because they've had a really big push to try and finally get that, approved that you could have a straight Bitcoin ETF. The SEC are meant to be providing feedback on that in the next couple of weeks, so I think it's very likely that will happen. Anyway, they have Bitcoin, Ether, ETC, and a bunch of other smaller ones. But yeah, over the last few years, they'd had a 3% fee for holders of that fund, and 1% of that was donated into the co-op. Really through 2017, 2018, 2019 and 2020, that didn't turn into a huge amount of money. It was all pretty sufficient for 2 or sometimes 3 people, and some some infrastructure maintenance and some small development projects. With the big spike that there was in 2021, that turned into a very large amount of donation in 2021. So we're sitting on around $5 million now. That funding ceased in April of this year, and the primary reason for that ceasing was because there was a large amount of money. Grayscale felt that they had, got us in a good enough position, and that further funding was not required. What that means, though, is that for the co-op, we have a pile of money, and in the absence of new funding sources, when we spend it, it's spent and it's done. Obviously, IOHK have gone away, labs have gone away. New funding sources are required, and yeah, but the spend that we have has gone up a fair bit this year because of taking on the core developers. So through the last 3 years or so, we had funded work on Hyperledger Bezu, but that had always been in the form of short-term contracts with ChainSafe or others, really just around hard forks. So, those implementing the protocol changes on ETC around hard forks. In last August, we hired Diego, who is doing full-time work on Hyperledger Bezu now. So that was great. At the very tail end of last year, where ETC Labs or really DFG, the parent company, defunded work on CoreGeth. The previous year, so January 2021, they had defunded the ETC Labs stuff around that core client. So that included sort of like development tooly things, like work that they'd had on tooling around the client, the block explorer they were running, and various other bits and bobs like that. There was like, if you look back in 2019, they had work on LLVM, EVM, the chain bridge. Trying to think, other bits and pieces, but they also had the incubator and grants program and broader stuff there. So that all died at the start of 2021, and then at the end of that year, funding of CoreGeth ceased as well. So there were 3 developers at that time: Luke, Isaac, and Chris. So Isaac and Chris were hired by the co-op, and are now working together with Diego. So we have those 3 core developers maintaining those 2 clients, and also Block Scout, RPC endpoints, and various other little bits and pieces that they've been working on. So the spend, has gone up a fair chunk from previous years. But it's sort of on if it stays at that kind of level, that's sort of about 3 or 4 years of funding that there is. And obviously the hope is that new sources of income will come from that, or other ways that can be extended and continued.
Thanks for the detailed update, and interesting to know that the funding was cut off primarily because of the massive windfall that's taken. That's a pretty good reason, if any, and it's.
And
I think
just to be clear, like that was very, very exceptional as compared to the previous years. Like the looking back at sort of like 2018 and 2019 specifically, right, where it was that crypto winter there. I think that, well, at least one of those years it was like running negative, right? That we spent more than the income, and there was a very small amount left in the bank account. For example, at that point when ETC Summit was running each year, in 2017, 2018, and 19, those years it ran, the summit, I think, was close to half the funding for the year. Essentially because the summit was never seen as premium enough, or ETC not seen as premium enough for people to want to pay to go to an ETC conference. So each of those years, it ended up being free of cost to participants. There was some sponsorship, but nowhere near enough to make up for the costs, which I think were around 150, 180,000 each of those years. And the funding that we had at those points, that was basically like, half the money, and then you're paying 2 people, and then you basically like you've run out. Where in 2021 there, that rather than 3, 4, 500K or maybe 6, those were sort of about the figures of that income. That instead was 4 million, so more than a 10x more than previous years. So really was quite a windfall.
Indeed. While we're on the topic of funding, this kind of links in with the other point on your recent update about the Treasury and potentially looking at a slimmed down version of a Treasury or a new version of the Treasury. What do you think, reflecting upon the last year and the debate of 1098, which I believe has been withdrawn now, what's your thinking on the next steps in terms of a Treasury? Is it necessary, especially with this new windfall? And how do you envisage a slimmed down version of that would be acceptable to everyone in the community, you think?
So yeah, no actual work has happened on that this calendar year, and my thought is that is really like something that is on pause for us. It's not an active consideration at the time of writing.
Okay,
interesting. Because I think that essentially, given that windfall, there is no crisis in terms of our funding. Maybe if nothing changes and we're like getting down to nothing, and other attempts at ecosystem sustainability are not succeeding, then yeah, maybe it would be something to reconsider again. But as of right now, I would not actively advocate for an in-protocol treasury.
Do you see a future where ETC Co-op converts into some kind of profit-making entity that can sustain itself, or do you think it's going to be long-term based entirely on donations and other community contributions?
Well, an interesting kind of legal and taxation thing there as well is, so the legal status at the moment of a co-op is that it is a public charity. that's the actual status. It's quite funny. There's a charity, but that's the status. So I mean, what that means in practice is you are, filing your taxes with the IRS, and that's basically like full disclosure on donations, and those are with named sources that those are coming from, right? That's a sort of a KYC'd real name kind of setup. As a charity, you can't accept cash in brown envelopes kind of equivalent that anonymous donations would be. You also are declaring all of your spending, all of your costs, all of your salaries, with donations to like groups in different countries. That's declared as well. So it's this very kind of open setup. Anyway, with that public charity status, the intention is that any legal entity that's following that route must reach a certain threshold of diversity of donations after 3, or what, I think it's 5 years actually. So they are really looking for numerous small donators, right? That's really the setup that you want is that and I can't remember exactly the thresholds, but a good amount of your donations are meant to come from a broad set of individuals, and if it doesn't, you can't maintain that status. And I think the reason for that really is they don't want sort of charities in quote, which are really a front for a commercial entity. So, for example, it could be seen as though co-op is just a front for Grayscale, right? And then Grayscale are doing that to avoid paying taxes or something like that, right? That could be seen as being the case. What that means, because we obviously haven't got that diversity of sources, is that I think it's next calendar year or next tax year, we will have to transform into a private foundation. So a private foundation, what that means in the US is it's pretty similar to that charity status in that donations, you can get a tax credit for doing a donation. I mean, that's I think the same thing with a charity, right? Is donations that anybody has made into the co-op, you can get a tax credit for it because it's a charity donation. That, I believe, is still the case for a private foundation, but there are some other things that we'd have to do slightly differently in terms of you are, as a private foundation, there's a certain percentage of your spending which has to go to public charities. So, I mean, in practice, that's not going to mean a lot of difference, but donations will have to be made to public charities. That wasn't the case before. It's not a very high percentage. So, as a private foundation, you're not a for-profit entity, but it's a different flavor than the co-op will have been. It will still be this entity, which is, the mandate really is that you are doing, public goods, public service in some form, in a non-profit making kind of way. But yeah, I don't think it would make sense for the co-op to become a for-profit. Because it's a different kind of deal. I mean, I wouldn't. if that kind of thing would make sense, I think it would be some different new legal entity. It wouldn't be a continuation, really.
Right. So
Does that-
just for clarity, you think you would dissolve the public charity co-op and then likely fire up a different entity that's a private charity, which has a charitable requirement like funding kids to learn how to code, for instance. I don't think that you can do funding kids to code for Ethereum Classic, but you could do something broad like that of getting kids computers and learning science, right?
So yeah, the migration from a public charity to a private foundation, that is a status change. It isn't a wind up of the existing one. That this is what will be happening next year, I think. But yeah, the additional requirement would require donations to a registered public charity. So yeah, I mean, if there are any existing public charities doing coding for kids or whatever that could do an ETC specific thing, you could do that. But if there isn't, then it would be something broader like that. Yeah.
Gotcha. And so just for clarity, you said you can just transfer the status. You don't have to wind down and dissolve.
Correct.
Okay.
Where a transition from a private foundation to a for-profit, that would be a completely different beast. And probably, yeah, I mean, even if you could do it, I don't think it would make sense to do it, because it would be such a change of mission that you can't go, well, yeah, and with all this money that we got donated in when we used to be a charity, ha ha ha, that's our private money as a for-profit now. You can't do that.
What about in terms of sustainability, not making profit per se, but having some kind of mechanism that allows, for example, some kind of on-chain like fee taken from a contract that's used a lot as a means to fund activity via the co-op. Even though you're not making money from it, you're still self-sustaining, but all of those funds go back into protocol development. Would that be still considered for profit legally?
I don't know. It's a question for the lawyers, really. I mean, that I always think it's a bit odd with really centralized projects, where they've effectively they've had a crowdfund at the they've had a crowdfund at the start, and then perhaps they have either in protocol or out of protocol but on chain things, so like Zcash, for example, right? So on Zcash, you've got the Zcash Foundation and you've got the Electric Coin Company, and they're receiving slices out of that inflation. But the Zcash Foundation is a public charity as well. They've got a similar situation to us. So I don't really know how that's okay, what they're doing. It might not be. I mean, it's tricky with that. If you've got money coming in from on chain, is like, how do you account for that? That the reporting that you have is really like, which legal entity or private individuals donated money to you. And they want to know that because, that they want to then follow that up with their own IRS filings, to see, well, okay, you donated money here. Well, have you met your own tax liabilities for doing that donation? So if that's just like magic money coming out of the ether, yeah, not sure.
Interesting. I guess this is a problem that would need to be solved if there was unaccounted for cryptocurrency coming into some real world entity. Maybe the allocation could be dealt with on chain via some kind of DAO or multi-sig.
Yeah.
But then you'd still need like a real world entity to pay developers, for example, convert that crypto into fiat, or maybe it would just be purely paying the developers directly from the DAO to be a better solution to avoid that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's like, doing your own tax filings for crypto gains and things is it's all a little bit, not entirely clear how that works, and obviously varies by jurisdiction and so on. But, magic money appearing like airdrops or whatever, so here you go, magic money appears out the sky, and then whoa, what is that? Is that like income? Is that
Yeah.
capital gain with a
Yeah.
zero cost basis? Like, well, what the hell is that? And then how that fits in with a public charity is also, a little undefined. And we've been lucky, really, in a way, to this point, in that all of that donation into the co-op has come from real world legal entities, right? So it's a lot of a simpler tax situation.
So just in that example, I would think, I mean, the source is inflation. So the network participants, that's who's you're diluting their coin, right? So that's the source. But yeah, it would probably be income because it's expected and and it's predictable. It's hardly a donation. It's hard coded in there. I think
Yeah.
that this is also a concern when you talk about a treasury and putting one into ETC.
Yeah,
Just as
absolutely.
an example, I just have a background in accounting and worked in a tax company and stuff. So I would just expect that would be income, and kind of like what you're saying though. Even if you did a DAO, a legal DAO, and all of that, which is stuff I've been researching here in Wyoming, is you still have to be a private foundation, and it still will be taxable unless you can, unless you're doing the charitable organization and qualifying for all of those things. So I don't know how the Cardano Foundation is doing it, for instance, or how Zuku and the electric coin company, but I'd imagine that they are paying income tax on it, unless they're qualifying for that uh, charitable thing classification, and then and they're spending money and expensing it in that way.
Well, and I think the other thing that's probably different. Oh, sorry, I think the other thing that's probably different with a lot of these foundations is that they're nearly all going to be offshore. They're Swiss foundations, they're off in the Cayman Islands or whatever, right? And then that's kind of like your sort of your legal protection is, well, fuck you, IRS, we're not going to report to you anyway. Fuck you, we'll go and do what we want. And in those jurisdictions, they are presumably sort of shielded from that. It's like, here's your get out of jail free card. Come and be based with us, and and we'll look the other way.
Yeah, that doesn't really work in the U.S. though, because the U.S. says even if you make money foreign, you're still taxed with U.S. I worked for an exchange that attempted that Switzerland stuff, and IRS was not too happy about that. So I'm knocking, that's for sure. So you in the U.S. at least, I don't know other jurisdictions, but in the U.S. you don't get out of paying your tax liability just because you're organized in a different country. However, if you make it so that you haven't made any income, which would be inflating your expenses on any cash that came in that foreign country, or sorry, in that foreign corporation, then you have no income to report, right? So you haven't made any money, and so then there's nothing to tax for the U.S. But if you're making income and you reside in Colorado, for instance, like Charles does, I certainly imagine that he is paying the U.S. government, and he's definitely paying the state of Colorado, because in Colorado, state tax is about 5%, and if you live in Colorado, it doesn't matter what company, like where it's located or anything. If you're making it in Colorado, you're getting taxed in Colorado. So anyways, it's definitely like a good discussion, because it is very challenging. I'm looking at Wyoming and the DAO LLC stuff that they did up there. They're the first state to do it. And it's really challenging to try to take in money and not have a tax liability with it to fund protocol development. So it's going to be a really hard problem to solve legally. And I'm glad that, like, I think you're going down that private foundation. I think that that's probably an appropriate route. It's just, it's going to be tough because it's just all new laws and it's state laws as well. So state laws differ, so.
Well, and I mean, this is the other complexity, right? Is it doesn't, even if Wyoming's, some magic pixie land in terms of what you can do, that doesn't stop the feds. Like, they don't give a fuck.
Exactly. Yeah. It doesn't stop the feds, and it doesn't stop the state that you reside in, or, like, for your instance, you're up in Vancouver, so the country you reside in, right? So you have other jurisdictions that are like, yeah, you're fine there, but where do you operate out of? Right?
Yeah.
Like for me, I'm in Colorado, so I can be like, yeah, I can farm in Wyoming, which is 3 hours away from me. But yeah, but your office is in Colorado, so you're getting taxed, bud. So
Yeah. So, but by the way, for me at least, Ronan, you're breaking up a fair bit there. Just to let you know.
Ronan, if you could check your mic or try and find a different mic, it's a little bit interference.
Yeah, maybe exit a bit and rejoin.
Oh, I'm sorry about that, guys. Is this better?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is much better.
Yeah.
Okay, I was out on my front porch. My apologies.
But yeah, I mean, as far as I've seen, the only kind of like safe, in quotes, sort of tax thing for any project seems to be, incorporate not in the US, don't employ or use any US persons in your operations, and block USA for sales. Like, that seems to be like the only kind of like safe thing, and anything else will be, compromised in some way or difficult in some way.
Interesting. I guess just to note that maybe avoiding the Treasury has solved that problem in multiple different ways, and potentially posed quite a significant risk if indeed the Feds did want to cause havoc on Ethereum Classic. So nice that we sidestepped that.
Yeah, I mean, and all I can think is that, for a lot of these projects that do have a foundation, they're either in a legally sketchy place, or they're probably paying income tax but not talking about it.
Yeah, and Zcash, that's out of Colorado. It's out of Boulder. Cardano's out of Longmont, which is just north of Boulder, Colorado. Like, these people, if you're in Colorado, you have to pay the state tax. So that, and then I have no idea how they're getting away from U.S. tax. They're located out of here. They employ people in the U.S. I just would think that there's a lot of tax liability that is going on in the background. Even if publicly they might portray that they're just a foundation and a charitable thing, I'm sure that there's a very straight conversation with the IRS, and I'm sure that their tax attorneys or accountants are being diligent on that, because that really changed in about 2017, 2018 during that cycle. Every crypto accountant and everything was like, okay, this funny business isn't going to work. You got to pay any back taxes and make good to the IRS.
Okay, so I wanted to switch gears a bit and now talk a little bit about ETC infrastructure. And the first point here is there was a question about what is in the pipeline for Core Geth in terms of clients and features in the mid to long term.
I actually wrote this one, and what I probably should have clarified. I just wrote it real quick, but I'm curious. With Core Geth, what we know is the merge is going to happen, and then Core Geth is going to become essentially upstream. So how's your planning for that? Like, what are you thinking in terms of that? I think it ties into funding as well. So that, and then also with Bezu, I had another question that I forgot to add, and that was, you were talking a little bit ago, maybe a year ago or so, about adding mining capability into Bezu. Is that functional now? How's that going?
Sorry, on that first question, could you clarify in terms of upstream? When
Ethereum moves to proof of stake, Geth will kind of be obsolete, right?
No.
Upstream Geth?
No, it won't be at all.
Oh, it won't?
No.
Okay.
So
Just the consensus mechanism is removed, and then everything else is the same.
yeah, so I mean, I guess it's all a little bit of a mess for historical reasons. So for a long time, the talk was about Ethereum 2, right? Is like, right, we're going to make a new one, and it's going to whatever, well, various things that it will have sharding, that we're going to have different execution environments. So it will be like EWASM instead of EVM, or EVM and EWASM sort of choices, and obviously the switch to proof of stake. All of that has kind of like largely collapsed. Sharding is still kind of like planned, but further out. The sort of roll-up centric approach has kind of obsoleted that somewhat. But yeah, like the reason the merge is called the merge is because parts which were originally planned to be separate are now kind of getting munged together. So with Ethereum 2, as it started, the first thing that was built was the beacon chain. So the beacon chain's been running, I guess, 18 months now, right? So that's a parallel chain using proof of stake, but like nothing is like happening on that. There hasn't been smart contract capability on it. Transactions aren't happening. It's just been like, well, here's sort of like the anchor point for everything else that was planned on Ethereum 2. So that plan saw you having the beacon chain that's kind of like the center of it, that you would have had the different shards, and then the synchronization between the shards happening through the beacon chain, right? That's like the center point. And then on the shard chains, those would have had the execution environment, which could have varied between the shards. So, for example, the continuation of the existing chain could have been on one shard, whatever shard 0, there you go. That's the continuing F1 chain. But then, maybe you have other chains which are running EWASM instead of EVM, or have, some other changes in their properties, and then that you would have some mechanism for cross-chain communication and stuff. So different apps could be running on different shards, but you could still like do a slower communication or whatever, right? That was sort of like the original F2 plan. So like basically none of that is really happening anymore. Shards are still further away. That execution environment's work and many years worth of work towards EWASM is all like down the toilet. EVM is kind of like the answer. And then what happened with the merge was the decision was made to basically logically merge that beacon chain and the existing proof of work chain. So what you have in a post-merge world, which used to be called Ethereum 2 or used to be called Serenity, and now is just Ethereum, what you actually have is you have two clients that you're running. So you have a beacon chain client, which is just, ticking along on that proof of stake, and, the stakers are, minting new blocks. And then the other piece that you have is you will have what they're now calling an execution environment client. And those are the existing clients. So that's like Geth, Aragon, Bezu, and Nevermind. Open Ethereum has died. That's now unsupported and soon to be gone. The people that were working on that within Gnosis are now focused on Aragon. Aragon has become like a really strong number 2 client to Geth. Geth's always been the dominant client on Ethereum. Open Parity, then Open Ethereum was, a very clear number 2. So that isn't the case anymore. It's now Geth and then Aragon, previously known as Turbo Geth. So Aragon is a a pretty major re-architecting of the client itself. Running on the same protocol, obviously, but vastly different data structures. Post merge, those existing clients will continue to exist and be maintained, now called execution environment clients. So the way that switch to POS will work is some additional like RPCs or API added for those two to talk to each other. So what you would have is your execution environment, your geth, at a certain block, or it's not actually a block, it's actually identified as total difficulty. So at a certain collective total difficulty rating, you'll have the transition to proof of stake. And what will happen there is, rather than the in process proof of work, instead you're going to have that execution environment talking through an API to a beacon chain client, and saying, hey, what's the next canonical block, or whatever kind of things that they need to do, so that you will have something which would logically be equivalent to if that proof of stake support had been embedded in the geth client or other execution environment, and that you were choosing that consensus. So logically, it's like that, right? That say if they'd never done the beacon chain separately, and that had just been another component of the existing clients as a mode, those two clients that you're running together, those two processes, are logically equivalent to what would have been the case for that. But yeah, because of kind of the history of the beacon chain starting, and then all of these different kind of changes of plan about this, how this thing's going to work, logically what you've ended up with after 7 years worth of work, I guess, since the chain went live, is effectively like, okay, well, we're just going to have a bit of extra code that does proof of stake instead of proof of work, and we're going to switch over. Like, that's logically all that's happening with the merge. Practically, it's split into these two clients, and it's this kind of bit of a mess of a thing. But that's what's happening. But what that means is that those existing clients are going to continue to be maintained. So we're not going to be an upstream. We're not going to have to like maintain CoreGeth ourselves, because it's irrelevant. Everything basically stays the same, apart from that little bit of extra, which is allowing it to talk to a beacon chain client, which obviously we wouldn't be using that part. But unless those clients explicitly strip out support for proof of work, which I cannot see them doing, I don't think it's at all worthwhile for them to do that, then we'd just continue to downstream from them. Though it's only actually CoreGeth that is downstreaming from Geth. For Bezu, all of our code is in the upstream. We're just working directly in the master there. There's no customization that we're having to maintain there for Bezu, though that is the case for CoreGeth, essentially because the Geth team do not want ETC changes upstream to them. They've got no interest in that whatsoever. So we have to maintain at least that, the deltas for ETC support. But there are other things within CoreGeth which are not just related to ETC support. So there is the potential that over time we are building up other bits of functionality which are not going back, and we're maintaining. But there isn't a worry in the same way as appeared might be the case a couple of years ago of saying, oh my God, when Ethereum 2 happens, it's all on us. That isn't the case.
Oh, that's great news. I actually wasn't aware of that, so thank you for going into that in detail. Regarding Bezu, that's great that you're working in the master branch. Regarding mining functionality, I remember that you guys were working on that and you were trying to optimize that. How is that going in terms of providing another client for miners so they have an option?
Yeah. So a fair chunk of work was done on that in 2021. Bezu can be used for mining. I believe it's got everything it needs. But as far as I'm aware, no mining pools are actually using that. I guess it's one of these kind of like game theory things of like, you've got the network effect, like, so why would anyone, take that jump? I mean, I guess it would have to be something in Bezu which is uniquely better and different in a financial way, right?
It would be lowering operational costs or something like that, being more optimized.
So yeah, Bezu will work. I'm not aware of anyone actively, using that and trying, and it hasn't been a priority to say, well, look, let's try and make Bezu better than CoreGeth for mining. I mean, I guess you could, but
what was the name of that TurboGeth client? What's it called now?
Aragon.
Aragon. Is Aragon more efficient than CoreGeth? Would that be a competitive mining client?
Not for mining. I don't believe Aragon has mining support. Even I don't think, or maybe it, maybe it does. But again, it's not sort of a main focus or a recommended thing. The main difference that you have with Aragon is, it is vastly better at syncing and performance. The way that the database works is completely different. Let me see if I can. There was a really good article on it. I'll see if I can find it. But so yeah, with Aragon, that was another thing which is in the plan for this year is really to evaluate Aragon and see, how much work would it be to add support for etc to Aragon, to try and quantify the benefits and improvements that you would see from a client point of view. I mean, for a long time, TurboGeth was kind of an experiment, really, right? It was sort of alpha, beta-y kind of level, not recommended to end users, but really trying to prove, can you basically do a complete revamp and come up with a model which is quantifiably better? And then the aim there was really not necessarily even to productize TurboGeth as was, but really it's a proof of concept. And then if that works, then the expectation is that kind of alternate approach could then be implemented in other existing clients or in new clients. So the interesting thing there is so Aragon then is the rename of that TurboGeth code base. So basically a downstream of Geth, but with huge range of changes. But then what they've also done is created a C++ client using those same patterns, which is called Silkworm. And there is also a new Rust client whose name I forget as well. But basically, those three new clients are all using the same architecture. And then the plan is that they would be kind of plug and playable for the different parts. Part of the rationale for that as well is related to licensing. That Geth is GPL licensed, and if you build these new components, that they could be process isolated so that they could be under permissive licenses. But yeah, really they've kind of stepped up from that initial sort of TurboGeth prototype, and hence the renaming is Aragon is really like production quality, and you can see that by if you look at ethernodes.net. Is it org? Yeah.
And
So
oh, sorry about that. Go
so
ahead.
yeah, so Geth is now 80% of Eth clients, and Aragon is number 2 with 9%.
Okay. And
Could I
is
just
the
check how you
maintaining
are
team
for
of
timing? I just want to make sure that we have enough time to fill in all the questions. Do you have a hard limit, Bob, on time?
No, I'm fine.
Okay.
regarding Aragon, we saw with Open Ethereum, we saw kind of a hostile team to the Ethereum Classic network there. Do we have any concerns of that with the team that's maintaining Aragon, or are they fairly neutral to the network?
Yeah, that isn't a problem. I'm just going to drop something into the notes channel. Where are we? Which is a further link on that, so people can have a bit of a look into Aragon.
Great. Okay, so we don't have a risk of any hostility from the core development team there.
Well, so I've just dropped a link into the community called Notes. The thing which is different with Aragon is it's intentionally modular, and same thing for their other code bases. So I actually got a note drop from one of the prime developers on Aragon saying, well, hey, you guys could make a module to add ECC support.
Great.
So that, yeah, because it's designed in a modular way, which all of the earlier clients were not, it should, I believe, and this would be part of the evaluation, obviously, be possible to write, here's an ETC module that you can add in. So it shouldn't be intrusive into that, into that base code base. I mean, whether or not that's practically true when you actually do it, is always a different question. Any kind of modularity is only as good as like when you've actually got the thing working, right? You don't know if it's a rich enough API to not leak. But yeah, that it should certainly be a lot less of a burden onto the core team. I think that probably is the foundational reason for Geth not wanting to take things upstream, beyond the fact that Peter hates ETC. It is really that, like, anything that you take upstream, you're kind of implicitly supporting, right? So what's the incentive for any of those groups to keep maintaining that stuff? It's different on Bezu because it isn't an upstream downstream relationship. It's like literally, we're doing the work for those code paths and it's all on us. And I guess there's a risk of, if you're doing that ETC specific work in Bezu, and potentially some of your changes could break Ethereum support, that's a risk. But if you have somebody working in there, that's quite different from saying, hey, can we push this upstream to you? And if it screws up, well, it's on you. The incentives aren't great for that.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for going into detail on that.
On the topic of future sort of backwards compatibility with Ethereum mainnet, do you think there's going to be a point in the future where Ethereum Classic, for technical or other reasons, completely decouples and reaches some state of stability? And obviously, if there's things that are specific to proof of stake and sharding, then there's no need for Ethereum Classic to maintain that, but then that would break contract compatibility. So is there some kind of decision-making process as to how that happens and when that might happen? And is that something on the roadmap?
I wouldn't be overly worried. I mean, the really sort of odd thing that's happened is, so thinking back to when I was working on the C++ client in 2016, I joined that team around the same time as Greg Colvin. So you guys know Greg Colvin or not? He's got a massive big beard, looks like Gandalf, and he had got decades of experience on working in virtual machine sort of environments. He worked on the Java VM within Oracle's Linux. Anyway, so he joined that team around the same time as me in 2016, and first thing he did was like sort of a round of optimizations that made that sort of did a 10x on the performance of that client. And then he started work on that with no protocol changes, right? That's just optimization of the client. Then he started on work to make some simple changes to the EVM to add support for subroutines and static jumps. So those are kind of like VM or language features from like the 1970s, right? It's such basic stuff of saying, hey, let's have some opcodes for like jumping to a subroutine and returning from a subroutine, or jumping a certain amount of bytes backwards and forwards. Anyway, that stuff never made it in to Ethereum. His contract actually like expired and wasn't renewed. Like, he was working for a pittance, bringing decades and decades of real world VM experience. And really like that what you had with the EVM as it was made, it was very very kind of like naive and incredibly inefficient, having 256-bit numbers for everything, so everything kind of, you can't use like, none of the chips and hardware are doing that. So it's like you're simulating those sizes anyway. So he'd got changes proposed for versioning of the EVM, for adding these static jumps and subroutines. So none of that actually happened in the end. He stopped being paid, but he kept doing that stuff for like a couple of years anyway. And then the EIP for that like got rejected. And then even after that, he kept going for another year, trying to just do simple subroutines, and then that hasn't happened. So really what you've had, also the answer on that, why that was happening was, like the EVM won't matter anyway, right? We're going to have EWASM. Like, it's going to be Ethereum 2, and like everything we've done, like that doesn't matter. It'll be going away. And then like that totally hasn't happened at all. And what you've actually had is that the EVM has become the de facto standard for like everything. You look at all the other all the other L1 chains, like nearly everything has got EVM compatibility or just uses the EVM. Like the EVM and Solidity, like that's the de facto standard, even though it's shit. So it's kind of a bit of a situation like you had with JavaScript, right? Of like, hey, here's JavaScript. It got knocked together in a few weeks and it's totally crap. Oh my God, like the whole of the internet and all web is sitting on top of this crappy language and it's never going to change. I think that's largely like the situation that you have with EVM is like the EVM has kind of like de facto ossified really already. And I mean, maybe over time some of these things can be added in, like there's an active EIP which maybe is going to go into Ethereum soon, which is finally adding this kind of like versioning container stuff. So like the EVM versioning kind of stuff can fit into that, so that you can have the potential of saying, well, look, is it version 1 or version 2 of the EVM or what have you? So that you could make non-backwards compatible changes, that you could have we've got a new EVM version, if smart contracts are deployed with version 2, they can make use of these new and improved features. But I mean, the existing one, like, it's never going to go away, and I don't think it's ever really going to significantly change because too many people are using it, and you're just stuck with it. it's not good, but it's kind of good enough, and there you are. So I wouldn't be overly worried about having some situation where, Ethereum do something that's, significantly different or better or whatever, but that better only fits within their classifications of better, and it would be a very negative thing that maybe breaks existing contracts or whatever. I don't see a lot of that potential for that in the future. I think the only real breaking potential that there is, and that we have had and still do have, is finding that there are real attack vectors, and you have to have some gas repricing thing, to avoid the potential for the chain to be brought to a halt, and you have to make these sort of emergency changes that will break some stuff, but you have to, otherwise someone can attack the chain and you're all dead.
Right. That's interesting. So you believe that versioning, for example, is likely to be another thing that Ethereum Classic can basically just inherit from the rest of the ecosystem without making too much of an effort itself?
Yes. Let me see if I can find the EIP for that and drop it in.
Were there any other comments on Ethereum Classic ecosystem before we move to the next topic? In terms of from the floor of the chat, did anyone want to ask about the clients? I believe we have a couple of the developers in the chat as well. So now's the chance if you have any.
Yeah, I have a question. So I've recently looked at some data collection about transactions and how stuff works. So, for example, if we look at the Block Scout, we can see that the application hasn't really been updated for a few years. I think it's running the same. So I was curious to know if there is a plan to pull more data from the blockchain and maybe have it sorted out and labeled to some extent where you may possibly, I don't know, see a dashboard or have something like that where you see on 5 minutes candles how many transactions have been made, how many were wrong or something happened to them. Like what type of metrics can we pull and reveal to developers and I don't know, people who are interested in building?
So I guess this relates to the Block Scout Explorer.
Yes.
Maybe I can chime in here.
So Diego had made some little note about that. Let me see what he said.
Go ahead, Isaac.
Sure, I'll take a little screenshot, and that'll hopefully be a good visual aid. But I too am very interested in metrics and observability for this kind of stuff. And as it is, Geth actually ships with.
So with Block Scout,
Sorry, Bob. Isaac was.
I was just talking. I know that you have problems hearing them from the Linux stuff from previous calls. So just a heads up.
Oh, okay. Is my audio?
Yeah, I can't hear Isaac, so I'm going to be quiet until somebody says not to.
Yeah, I'll let you know when Isaac stops talking. But Isaac, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. well, can't hear me, but sorry, Bob. Geth ships with a pretty extensive feature set for metrics aggregation and collection. It ships with support for different data structures. So the one that I like to use is for either Prometheus or Influx. Influx is my weapon of choice. And you can use the default stack for those metrics that's like Grafana, whatever, and Influx. If you just Google Grafana Influx, you'll find, I'm sure, some Docker image that'll ship all three together. And Grafana provides the dashboard. That's that screenshot that I'm showing you there. And that's backed by the Influx database, which is a time series database. And Geth has a flag metrics, -- metrics, and there's some other sub flags beneath that too for customization. And what that configures Geth to do is to post those metrics to the Influx database that you would configure somewhere. And so that's a great way to get your eyes on this kind of both client information. There's sort of two primary domains of information that Geth will export for you. And the first is the client information. So that gives you information about how long it's taking to process blocks and what kinds of messages are coming in and out and when and how many of them. CPU usage on the machine that you're running and memory. But you also then can look at some chain data, and that's the other primary domain. The chain data will have stuff like what's the current block head and how many transactions are in these blocks. And you can then take that a step further because those two compared, the blockchain information itself is less. There's less of it than the client information. Part of that is because the metrics collection motive originated with debugging, obviously, and observability and sort of the DevOps side of things. And so there's other sort of adjacent programs that if you look for exporter labeled programs like Geth Exporter, and there's a few of them out there. Those work adjacently to Geth, and they'll connect up via RPC and then do some extra exporting of that chain data, and you can pump that chain data into the same Influx database that you already have running. So that's a way to bulk up on those blockchain metrics too. And one of the challenges with these dashboards, or at least with Grafana itself and Influx too, Grafana is set up for observability and alerting too. It configures really well with that, but it's generally not used as a public tool. It's used as like an internal team tool, like are our servers up type thing. And so it doesn't have very good permissions, and it's sort of this ongoing nagging challenge is getting a Grafana dashboard that's public and read-only, and you can do it, and we've tried it, but it wasn't something that we felt like was A, getting a lot of use, and B, was worth the work of keeping up, because it really is pretty simple to spin up for anybody on their own too. But anyways, I hope that answers your question. And it's not a block, not exactly a block explorer per se, because those tend to be interactive applications where you sort of have that dashboard idea, but then you dive in and say, well, what's in that block, or who sent that transaction? And these metrics are just that. They're just metrics, and they're not intended to be sort of interactive, step-by-step, feature-based applications. But there are a few open source explorers that, if that's more your speed, Expedition was one that the boys who worked on at ETC Labs on some of the tooling that Bob talked about earlier that they've built out using the OpenRPC paradigms that they were building simultaneously too. And so that's most of that's in React and Node.js, so it's pretty accessible, and they've done great work with the actual coding of it so that it is really extensible and readable, and you can see what's what and make your own customizations as need be.
Yes.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, that answers my questions. In an environment that I saw, they were using Wazoo agents for collecting data from multiple sources, and then they were using Elasticsearch for filtering and all kinds of plugins for labeling information like in real time. Let's say you have a transaction now, and the data that you'll bring about that transaction, even if it's okay or fail, or you'd have it really fast, like top 5 minutes since it has been executed. So basically what I'm trying to find out if this sort of metrics, like let's say how many NFTs were contracted, or how many participations we had per day in a contract, or stuff like that, like general stuff. I think it can be useful, and maybe if made available for pulling through an API or something like that. I think that can be a tool that I don't know, exchanges, maybe institutions, even ordinary users can work with.
Yeah, and so that use case is a practical one, sort of doing those contract analyses and further doing that in real time. One of the programs you might be curious about looking into is called Ethereum Etl, and so that's builds this set of programs around the extract, transform, load paradigm, and so that's sort of that next level into the chain data. So we're not just saying how many contracts are there, let's count them. We're saying, okay, what do these contracts actually look like? Do they match patterns?
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's a deeper dive into it, and so you need a little bit more specialized software to do that, but you can do it. 4Byte has some code around that too. Yeah, but I think it's a really interesting space for development too.
I'll give it a try when I'll get more familiar with the tools, because if it works for, I don't know, terabits of data, it should really work fine for us. So that would be an interesting project to really have a more clear real-time overview about what's happening with the protocol at small intervals of time. I do have a question for Bob, if I can.
Sure.
So you have mentioned about the new status, and you have also mentioned even tonight that coop had this role to maintain the protocol and keep it alive and keep the parity and also the stuff about the clients, very great. But my question is, now that you are moving for a foundation status, will COP's role be the same, or it will try to have new roles? Are you aiming for how should I say it, new projects that aren't only related to the protocol? Are you looking for an extension of the attributes you had before?
So, I mean, in terms of a switch to a private foundation, I mean, that's purely a IRS tax treatment thing of the legal entity. That's the only difference that would be there. In general, what we've had the focus on is those really foundational things, right? Like the clients and the block explorer and the public RPC and various other little bits and pieces. But yeah, stuff at a higher level makes sense as well. And as we have capacity and ability, I think we can pick up other kind of projects, or through grants and other things, support support others looking to do that kind of stuff.
Okay, thanks.
Just on the last question, Brolal, we might bring this up later, but you might also want to look into the graph, which is a protocol for aggregating blockchain information that I believe ETC will be getting support for soon. So just to mention. I wanted to switch to the next topic now, which has been an ongoing thing. And this, I saw, Bob, that you mentioned in the chat, there's a bit of a story behind the current situation with IOHK and the Twitter account, the eth_classic account, which is currently looking like it's pretty dormant, shall we say, but is a potentially awesome source of marketing and resource given the amount of followers it has. So what are your thoughts on that, and could you explain the situation as far as you can see it?
Yeah, sure. So my understanding of like the history of the eth_classic Twitter handle is that it was created by some community guy whose name I forget, Carlos maybe, really quite early on, at the very start. IOHK came along, not very many months later, where Charles had said, well, hey, I think that as an Ethereum co-founder, he said he felt an obligation to support people who had invested in the crowd sale on the story of unstoppable, immutable dApps, and that you really had these two different visions sitting within Ethereum of world computer and of programmable Bitcoin, and those could not be they can't live within the same instance, so you have the split anyway. So the first thing he was doing there was he paid for a community manager. I don't know if he hired that guy or hired someone else or whatever. He was also funding the Let's Talk ETC podcast, and then started on Mantis. So at some point, that Twitter handle was given over to IOHK because they were basically paying for that community management stuff. Kevin, I think, was independent at first, and then he ended up getting hired by IOHK to be paid for that community manager kind of role, which I think he ended up taking over from the people that had been around earlier. He had TweetDeck access to that handle, And that's been the case for, I don't know, at least 3 years, 4 years or whatever, that he had access to that. Firstly, when he was within IOHK, then when he, they stopped funding that role and he was just independent, he had that access still. Then when he was at Co-op, he had that access still, and then that's ended as of February, and he still has that access. Sort of the story when Kevin was coming out of IOHK was that he was that Charles had said to him initially, "Oh yeah, you know what? Like you can take that handle with you." For some reason, he changed his mind on that, and that didn't happen. It didn't make a practical difference at that point anyway, because the access that Kevin had continued the same, and then he was working at Co-op, and but Co-op never had control of that account, right? Kevin was maintaining the Co-op's own Twitter handle and various other bits and pieces of communication around that. But he was also doing the Eth Classic handle, independently, with him having that personal access, right? That was never anything to do with the Co-op. As of sort of through the tail end of 2021, for whatever personal reasons, Kevin has become, a lot less active and become very kind of dormant. And that was happening at the Co-op as well, which is why he, ended up not working for the Co-op anymore, because nothing much was being achieved. But then that has left us in a problematic state with regard to that main Twitter handle, which is basically just sitting there kind of useless. That it is owned by IOHK, though that's nothing new. But in terms of practical output, that's become problematic through the combination of that ownership and Kevin's own private situation. I have approached Charles on a number of occasions about either donation of or purchase of that handle by the Co-op. But in a typical Charlesy way, this is a typical kind of Charles pattern that you may or may not have seen. You probably won't know, but I've had this firsthand. Is Charles often just ignores things for ages. You just can't get an answer from him. He just doesn't reply. If it's not in his benefit, he's got this sort of strange dual thing, right? Of if you want something and it is not to his benefit, he will just completely ignore you or not do that. I guess it's like a bit of a power play thing. However, on the flip side, any little anon makes some snipey thing at Charles, he will personally reply to it within seconds. That if there's something to his benefit, he will act immediately. If he doesn't care. So I think that's really the situation for this. It's not. I don't think it's a nefarious attempt to subvert anything, or that there's any risk of anti-ETC propaganda being put on there or anything. It's just he doesn't give a shit. After the Treasury and everything, and they've gone. It's well, fuck you, ETC, right? He doesn't give a shit. It's gone. So perhaps in a way.
So perhaps a solution is maybe contacting Twitter support. We saw that with the @Bitcoin handle during the Bitcoin Cash stuff, and once legitimacy was established, hey, someone that this is an open source project, someone needs to manage this in a proper way for the public, for a public good. Then Twitter ended up taking the Bitcoin handle and handing it off to anonymous people that acted in good faith. So I'm just thinking that might be a solution, especially if he's going to go dormant like that. We all know it's an established account. It's an open source project. So I'm just trying to think of a solution.
I really don't know, because this is also sort of rhetoric that you often hear from people as well. Like the Twitter handle, that's a public thing. It's a community thing, right? It's not. It shouldn't be privately owned. It belongs to us, and it's that kind of sounds good, but it isn't actually like the real world where any Twitter handle is, it's basically it's owned by an individual, and there's in the absence of it being obviously used in a malicious, bad way.
Yep.
It's just
right.
okay.
And you're right with the Bitcoin thing. They were selling Bitcoin Cash as Bitcoin, and IOHK is not doing that. They're just not using the handle.
So I don't know that's what you could even say. Somebody's got this and they're not using it, and I'd like it. Well, fucking who gives a shit?
True.
I'd also mention that there's a potential risk of, if everything is owned by ETC Co-op, then it becomes a little too centralized. And in a way, it's nice that IHK still maintains ownership, but it would indeed be good if they could at least implement this, like some kind of API key that allows us as a community to contribute to that Twitter thread.
I think that's exceedingly unlikely to happen. I think the resolution, the only sort of resolutions are, whatever, like Charles wakes up one day and decides to answer emails and either says, okay, here you go, or says, yes, that'll be $1 million, please, or hopefully something a little bit less, because that would make no sense. But it wouldn't surprise me if he said some ridiculous amount.
Have we tried to just go through their formal support channels by chance? I do know some personnel at IOHK, like employees, in the company and such, just from working in the industry. And I do know that people inside that organization are actually fond of ETC, especially like people that worked on Mantis, for instance. They've designated a portion of their time and their career to trying to work on the network. So I'm just trying to think of other ways instead of a direct message to Charles, is maybe go through their traditional support channels and see if we can kind of get it elevated through that system and get it on the radar, maybe of some people in the organization, and then it gets on his table that way. I don't know.
Yeah, kind of maybe, but I mean, the problem here is the way that some of these things work is Charles decides, right? Nobody's empowered to do anything but him. And in a way, if it's going indirectly, it kind of might piss him off even more. It's like somebody in IHK is going, hey, somebody approached me about ETC and whether we can do it or not, and he can be like, well, yeah, I know. So they can go fuck off. So it's tricky, right? Because it's not rational. It's all very ego driven, and that's how Charles is.
Yeah, I mean, his Twitter account that he owns or that they own would be worth more if it was posting things, and it would add more value. So maybe a solution, though, if we should probably start thinking of solutions. Are we going to fire up an alternative account that's kind of operated out of the GitHub? That's been something that we've been kind of looking at, and it's plausible. If we do something like that, we likely need to start listing it on all social assets in addition to the IOHK managed one, right? So not removing Charles from anything, but adding an additional Twitter account that actually is coming out of the repo.
Yeah,
there's also actually a Twitter account called Ethereum Classic, and I don't know who that is or what's going on. That hasn't had any updates. There's hardly any updates on it, but it's like a great name, and I don't know who that is.
Right, I think there's like one or two tweets from 2017 or something. So
yeah, there's not a lot going on there.
If anyone is listening to this call and knows who the owner is, then that'd be great to hear out.
Yeah, that would be an amazing solution. And maybe if we contact Twitter and try to see how to get an official verified account on Twitter for the project, maybe that's a route. Is even this dormant Ethereum Classic account? It's not being used. It's so just to see if that's a route to go. But and an alternative to that is setting up any sort of name that may be parked that anyone has control over, or finding a good name for it. I think that's also a route we should do. of setting up, one coming out of the repo.
Yeah, so there is already set up in the Ethereum Classic org a repo called Twitter-Together, which hopefully, once I get the credentials, can be set up to run a GitHub action to publish to whatever Twitter account we want, as long as we can control it and generate API keys for it. So I think definitely the first step is to run either just a dummy account or one of the handles that we control that's reasonably named. And then from there, we could then use that as an example to petition to Twitter, for example, to commandeer the Ethereum Classic Twitter account and then verify that. I think that would be a really good outcome.
Yes, and since we are here at and discussing social, I think we should also take a look at Discord. Now I know the Twitter handler is a big thing, but if we look at Discord, this server has grown in the past 2 years. It grown from I think 2.5k, 2,500 people to 12,000 people. So what I'm trying to find out from Bob, if in this program with the grants, if there be something for Discord to see if we can improve this environment. It has run basically on volunteers, and there are a lot of stuff that can be implemented, like having one of the channels embedded in the website, or see some sorts of integration with other platforms, and maybe some automatization. So the question is if Discord has a place in this social thing.
Well, I guess the one thing to that's kind of objective here is that the server on Discord, I believe, can be boosted. So I'm not sure if that's something that can be easily done, and if there's any actual benefits to that, because I'm not really privy to the benefits of boosting. In terms of embedding the Discord into a website, I'm not sure if that's going to be possible to do easily because of the login requirement, and Discord kind of wants to keep it as a sort of gated community type thing. So I'm not sure how that could be done. But yeah, Bob, over to you.
So yeah, I don't know. I'm quite ignorant about Discord, all those features, I think. But yeah, that obviously is where a lot of our actual, dialogue goes on. I guess the difference there between the main one between the Twitter and the Discord is that, Twitter is more sort of announcing and, promoting etc to the broader community, whereas Discord is more sort of discussion within the community that we do have. Along the lines of what Istora was saying, though, about distributed ownership. So Anthony actually wrote an article about that in 2018, which was talking about the fact that the website versus the versus the Discord versus the Twitter account versus the community fund versus the co-op, and that you had this big spread of kind of owners and resources very intentionally. So the deal with the Discord is like Miko owns it, right? And it's essentially like, again, one of these, feels like it's a community shared thing, but it really isn't. Miko does what he likes on Discord, and myself and others at various times have noted that it can be very low signal to noise at times, and I guess so part of that is sort of, social defense and toxicity and so on. But if you're looking to make Discord more friendly to newcomers and so on, yeah, maybe there's things that you can do technically, but equally, these things aren't really community owned. They're really owned by the people that are running them and the moderators. So yeah, could Discord be improved? I certainly think it could, but I don't know exactly what that looks like, and I don't know if you necessarily have consensus or can reach that easily on what those changes would be. What I've seen historically is really that things kind of don't change. It is how it is. We've had
Right, and that's probably out of scope of co-op's contribution to the network, right? You're focused on the network, the infrastructure, some of the public goods. A Discord server likely isn't qualifying in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, it's not exactly aligned, really, is it? I mean, it's sort of a broader issue, I guess, in terms of general sort of messaging and marketing and sort of product fit kind of stuff, right? Is there is no single authority, there's no single truth on why etc is good, what the key features are, why people should be interested. And it's if you have a situation where you have got a foundation and they've basically got all the money from the crowd sale, and then they can do campaigns and and ads and sponsorship and all of this in a coordinated kind of way, like that's never really been the deal with etc. And certainly for the co-op, well, actually there were some ad campaigns, I think the year before I joined the co-op, and they were just like grossly expensive, and I don't think they did any good whatsoever. And the co-op hasn't really like sponsored. I think one time we sponsored, I think it was F Berlin. We did a joint sponsorship between us and Labs, but that's just not really been the pattern for etc. I mean, maybe it could be. We've got more money now. Maybe we do do some big ad campaign thing, but yeah, it doesn't feel very etc-ish.
The best marketing in crypto ever is price go up.
Yeah.
So if ETC goes up in value, that is literally the best thing that can happen. So I think focusing efforts on the public goods, like you're doing, the clients, the block explorer, keeping that up, the reliability on that. I think those are great lifts, especially the RPC endpoint. I think that's a solid lift. Those things result in usability and people able to use the network, which results in price going up in the long run. And you can't beat marketing. You can't pay for marketing or exposure like the coin going up.
No, and I mean, I think the other thing as well is, you sort of, you've got to play your own game. If you try to sort of go that kind of ad money kind of marketing-y kind of approach, well, look across projects, like even the smallest kind of projects, as in not L1 chains, but whatever L2 stuff or particular dApps or whatever on Ethereum, they've often got hundreds of millions of dollars worth of like ecosystem grants, promotion, all that stuff, right? Like we can't compete with any of that. So are you just sort of pissing your money away on something which is going to be a hundredth of the kind of size of something that these other projects can do? I don't think you can really try and do things that way. I think, you just kind of waste your money.
Yeah, you definitely. I think you waste the resources, especially when Ethereum Classic has properties that no other chain can replicate. And like you're saying, if we just stay in our lane, we make sure that the network, the usability of the network is easier on the end users and the people trying to integrate.
Yeah.
At this point, this network's at a phase where it's about onboarding users and projects and making the experience a little bit easier. All of that will fall into place. We got the hash rate coming our way. We're in a good position, and I agree with you 100%. I don't think that we need to be blowing your budget doing Google ads. It's not a good spend.
No, I don't think so.
Although, I guess slightly tangential to that topic is the idea of conferences and whether there should be another ETC conference maybe next year. Are there any thoughts on that, Bob, or plans?
Well, so I mean, we're in a very different situation than we were in those previous years, right? Sort of talking about 50% of the funding being used for that. I mean, it's certainly feasible that we could do a summit like we'd done previously, and maybe that's 150, 200K. I mean, it's a big kind of spend, but maybe that's kind of okay. I think though that probably what makes more sense is doing like an ETC add-on event or parallel event as part of like existing things, like around DevCon or around EdCon or FCC or Consensus or other kind of conferences. I think that's likely to make more sense in that.
Bob, I agree with you because I think you're going to where the target audience is, opposed to having them just come to Classic. You're like,
Yeah.
I look at it as what you're really promoting is you're promoting EVM technology, right? So really, like any network that's running on an EVM, our whole concept is that EVMs are extremely interoperable. We all have different properties as a network, but Classic has its very decentralized proof of work, all of that, but other networks have value for other things. It's not necessarily our lane and our value prop to the network. But I think that's a great approach to conferences, is just saying, guys, years ago we talked about a multi-chain reality. We're living it now. So we're all on the EVM branch of the ecosystem. Let's aggregate and kind of all work together because we're built on the same underlying technology.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at existing, conferences, and there is tons of that, right? And it's not just hey, the Ethereum L2s are turning up at the Ethereum conference. You will have a whole bunch of other sort of EVM based chains there, even if they're sort of competing L1s, because as you say, it's all sort of related kind of world. I mean, I think only the really kind of big alternate L1s kind of are having their own specific conference, like you'll see, the Ava conference or Polkadot, or I don't know if Solana even do their own one. I guess they do. And there's a Cardano one, but, I think that only really makes sense if you've got some, something which is very, very different and kind of, sort of pretty incompatible kind of technology. But yeah, in the main, EVM, Ethereum flavor world is obviously like that's what the market is showing has got the network effect. That for all of its sins, the EVM and Ethereum flavors, that's what's won in the market.
Right, and I think when we talk about long-term adoption, we talk about it's not like, hey, let's recreate every project that's ever been built on an EVM. We want to be having conferences where people look over and they go, oh, maybe we should be deploying our project on Ethereum Classic as well, right? they're looking at multiple EVMs to attract users, and it's not very challenging to deploy on multiple EVMs. A little challenging to bridge, but we're getting that functionality where we build those ramps, and I think that's where you get value out of holding a conference, is that then someone starts deploying on that network, on your network, and then we see the network effect starts building. Interoperability starts building. Classic becomes just a default in the conversation of, oh, of course we'll support Classic as we launch. I think that's the goal, and that's where we're going. And I think hash rate will secure that messaging. And I think, having that type of presence at a conference, especially from an organization like yours, would be really high value. I know you're familiar with the conference circuit, so it's nice to have a representative like you out there doing that.
Yeah, and I think you don't need to have sort of arbitrarily different tech. Like, I think that's something that got really screwed up with Classic Geth, right? Was that the way that Classic Geth came to be was like, in the heat of that, in the heat of the hard fork, that you really had your Classic Geth team basically going, fuck you, Geth team, we're not going to work with you, we hate you, fuck you. And then Classic Geth just kind of like drifting off more and more, so that it wasn't in a situation where it could keep taking changes from upstream, and it just diverged off into a place that ended up like being bad, right, where the thing had just rotted because they couldn't take the changes from Geth because of that beginning. And that's really where first multi-Geth and core Geth came in, was going, okay, well, that was a mistake. Can we go back to where Geth is now and add that ETC support in and have a smaller delta to support? And similarly, the idea of having ETC specific sort of tooling or SDKs around the client, that never made any sense to me, because it's like, well, actually what you really want is you just want all of the good stuff that's happening on Ethereum just to be usable on ETC as well, right? You don't want to make your own MetaMask, really, if you can avoid it, to carry. You don't really want to make your own wallet. You don't really want to do a lot of these things, because basically you're not going to do it better than the existing team, and you've given yourself a real maintenance burden. Like, it's way better if you can to just sort of have as ETC as a sort of a mode or supported different option within these existing tooling. I mean, that's why that's the setup that we have with Bezu is, in my mind, really ideal, is saying, well, look, we're not off some weird branch of our own, or off to the side. We're just in there, working in the upstream. I mean, that's sort of ideal to my mind. And same sort of thing with any supporting tooling or whatever. You don't, or conferences for that matter, you don't really want to have your own thing unless there's a really good reason for it. You really want just your message to be like mixed in, and your and the support to be all mixed in, and that it's just like, well, hey, choosing to use ECC is like a trivial thing to do on end users or on developers or anything, right? So you don't have the burden.
And generally speaking, Bob, that's why we've seen ETC be able to integrate with every crypto exchange, is that if they ever supported ETH, it was trivial to add ETC into their wallet infrastructure, and wallet infrastructures are extremely complex, and it's all about security because so much funds go through. So so I agree with you. If you look in that light, I mean, we should be applying that that kind of across the board to try to onboard users. You go to where the users are at, and you make it extremely easy. And I think that's like with your RPC endpoint with MetaMask. If we have a button that you click a button and it updates, switch to the ETC network, and we're good to go. That's what the users need. And then all of a sudden they're using Classic, and they're like, whoa, look at the fees on here. Like, what's going on? And they're not having to install a new browser plugin and everything that you're talking about. I think that's kind of that is a great approach to how we should start moving forward as we onboard projects, people, and do any sort of upgrades.
Yeah.
I would also mention that on the conference side, there's, yes, in terms of tagging onto different communities, the main Ethereum community is an obvious win because there's lots of developers that know EVM. But there's also the philosophy side, which we can also tag onto in terms of the Bitcoin community. So worth considering many different types of conferences there.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the difference you have on that Bitcoin side is, how maximalist are they? Is it going to be, well, fuck you guys? There's no value in smart contracts anyway. Keep away from our conference, you scammers, with your shitcoin.
I think a lot of, historically, I think a lot of Bitcoiners did sort of support ETC as an underdog. So there might be a bit of like enemy of your enemy type thing.
Yeah, perhaps. I think for a lot of Bitcoiners, though, they're just not even thinking about ETC because they're not actually thinking about anything other than Bitcoin. Like, they're not thinking about technology even. They're not really looking for any changes or improvements. It's doing what it's meant to do, and there you go. That's the world.
Right, but that's something I think that could change. Like, if we are, positioning ourselves as on their side, like we agree with their arguments. We're just saying, look, here's an extension to that.
And actually, another kind of possible, like great path of commonality there is about proof of work, right? That especially when post merge, when you've got real sort of clarity and split there. As you guys were pointing out earlier, we're in a situation where ETC, if you're looking at proof of work chains, is trucking right up near the top there. So I think post merge, when that that ambiguity of saying, well, yeah, but Ethereum's still proof of work, when that's gone, that proof of work side is a real potential rallying point across those different groups, I think.
Yeah, and I think proof of work guarantees users. You guarantee mining users as you have this massive base, and so we'll definitely have users because as we climb that proof of work ladder. I think the articles recently had said it was $15 billion of equipment was spent on Ethereum mining equipment. So I mean, that's the stuff that's going to turn on over here. Those all have real users behind there. It's just about making using the network easier. Right now, there's just from my experience in the last couple months dealing with Ethereum Classic, there is a little bit of friction doing stuff like making it really clear how to use Remix and Ethereum Classic for developers. Getting MetaMask, if we can get that native support. I have no idea, what's going on with the div path on Ledger to MetaMask with Ethereum Classic. There's something going on there. Just those little things. They're not huge lifts, but it's just this friction of using it. And if we could just clean that up and polish it up, I think we'll be in a really good spot.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like MetaMask native support for ETC, that's something that there were many discussions on or talks on that, but that's not going to happen. They added sort of pluggability stuff so that you can build your own add-ons, but switching the network, I think somehow weirdly didn't work for that. I forget the details, but essentially they were sort of saying
with BNB chain is that there is a way to have a link that you click and it auto configs to MetaMask. So we should likely look at something like that, at least on the website, getting that in there so that someone just has to click and then it auto.
It's actually really easy. I could definitely do that.
Oh, cool. Okay, so yeah, we should try to get a PR in for that. And then my understanding was that MetaMask was adjusting their code to add, so you could set your div path and correct kind of the bug that we have with, I believe it's Ledger and MetaMask. It probably doesn't affect that many people because how many people actually use hard wallets? I think it's like power users use them. But anyways, I don't want to get too deep on that. I just was thinking that it's worth noting. I believe that will change and get fixed at some point.
Completely just unrelated, but popped into my mind. Another thing that the guys have been working on here is Gnosis Safe for ETC. So getting up a Gnosis Safe front end deployment. There's quite a lot of back end services, but yeah, we are actively working on that and hope to have that going quite soon, so that you can create Gnosis Safe instances on ETC just as easily as on Ethereum.
Can you just briefly for the call? Can you just explain what a Gnosis Safe is for those listening?
Let me see how they describe themselves. So, I mean, to my understanding, Gnosis Safe is a continuation of the Gnosis multisig. It used to have a different name. I forgot what the old name was. Oh yeah. So old multisig legacy multisig by Gnosis. So so Gnosis Safe is the successor to Gnosis multisig. So for anyone that doesn't know, on Bitcoin you have built-in protocol support for multisigs. That has not been the case for Ethereum, like by design. That you have the smart contract functionality so that anyone can build up anything they like. The issue has been that some of the multisigs that have been written have failed in horrifically terrible ways, with Parati's being the prime example of that. Anyway, the Gnosis multisig instance has been the most reliable one, as far as I know, of a smart contract implementation of a multisig on Ethereum. So if you, let me see, if you just search for Gnosis Safe, so gnosis-safe.io, there's all the information on there. And yeah, there's an open app button, and you can go off and make a multisig through their UI.
Yeah, that's great.
Oh, very cool.
There's Gnosis Sig. The Safe has a fairly standard API, and I believe there's various different front ends and other integrations that would then potentially work with that.
Right. So yeah, coming soon.
Great to hear. Well, we've been running for almost 2 hours now, so I wanted to potentially wrap things up fairly soon. I think as we have a whole bunch of content for the ecosystem updates, maybe we could do another call next week at the same time if people are available to go through that, because this call has been very content heavy, and I think it's about time to wrap up. So if there's any final questions that the floor wants to pose to Bob, or just topics that you wanted to have burning desires to bring up, then now's the time.
So one last point in Bob's list here was the RPC endpoint. We had started talking about a load balancer for that. I was just playing around with AWS. They have load balancers. Any thoughts on that in the future? Maybe having like a static URL, but then we have a load balancer that's pointing to, just preparing that endpoint for the future when there are multiple RPC endpoints available.
So I guess there's two thoughts I have on that. Firstly, if you're running that front end load balancer, like who's running that? Because if that ends up being the co-op, well, that's kind of not really adding or doing anything. The other point I would have is, until you've actually got somebody running other endpoints, with some reliability guarantees and, quality hardware behind it, I don't know it will make any, that it would practically improve anything. I think what is certainly workable and maybe beneficial would be to establish a new canonical RPC endpoint, which would be whatever, ethereumclassic.org/RPC or what have you. That would then point to what we're running initially. I think, you could do that easy enough. And it would give, a degree of, firstly, just stability for that RPC, right? That Ethereum, ethercluster.com, where we've got the stuff at the moment, that's a stupid name because it's not even running Ethercluster anymore, but you kind of stuck with that, right? Because that was what was being used. So I think getting a better canonical name, and then over time, trying to get everyone to be using that one, I think that would be a good thing. I mean, I guess, you could play around with load balancers, but until you've actually got a quality other thing to point at, I think it's just, it's just a premature thing. It might be fun or be a bit feel good, but I don't think it'll actually benefit end users at all. The redirection maybe is useful.
True. I think that it's cart before the horse as well. And I think that just addressing a static URL off the .org, I think that that's probably the best approach right now. My biggest concern with all of this has been end users and their configuration in MetaMask, and then what happens if your funding runs dry, and then they're like, oh no, my MetaMask isn't working anymore.
Yeah. I mean, it would be better to have it under that URL. I would agree. I mean, the pain is it's going to take forever to do that migration, right? It's not like Ethercluster can get turned off because that'll break everything. So it's going to be this sort of slow process of saying, well, hey, here's the new canonical one, and can you all start moving towards this? But yeah, I mean, even if you've only got a partial move, well, at least in some disaster scenario, then yeah, you're not pointing somewhere bad. Though I mean, the other thing I'd say is even if you did have a situation where, say, the co-op gets completely, is going away, that's not going to happen in any kind of hurry. And even if it did, it would be well, hey, look, we can just turn over the DNS listing to somebody else and they can sit behind it or whatever, right? I don't foresee any situation where you're going to have this disaster cut off and we all get warped off the planet before there's time to do anything. I think that's unlikely, but yeah, having a better name would be useful, I think, and it's a smaller scope thing to do.
Yeah, and then we can have whatever that button that we were just talking about on the .org to configure your MetaMask. It runs to that new URL,
right?
And hopefully that's how we start seeing the adoption. But okay, thanks for the answer.
Just wanted to say something to Bob. I think the name should be changed, and we can also have, in case of disaster, Docker image that we can run and maybe hook it up under the DNS, or have a Podman container, just run it up, and I don't know, I think we can get up 5 really fast and see for a test.
I mean, something to know is, prior to the change to Rivet, so I mean, initially, obviously, Ethercluster was running a cluster of Kubernetes stuff. It was that kind of setup. And at a certain point that got switched to just a single strong node. That was the setup prior to going to Rivet. Now, that obviously did have reliability issues, which is why we went to Rivet. But it's worth knowing, in that disaster scenario, if you're just like, okay, well, we'll just spin up a node and point to that, that's largely enough to keep things going along for right now. You wouldn't want to be stuck with that, but if you needed to do that, like, you could do that, and it would mainly be kind of okay for a bit.
Yeah, okay, I see.
Yes. I can't say more, but yes. So the answer is yes, but I can't say much more than that. And I mean, the other thing to say there on the mining side is that, ETC has been this tiny minority within Ethash. That won't be the case anymore post-merge. So all of a sudden, ETC is a lot more important to that mining community.
Yeah, that could be grassroots marketing right there. I mean, those people will be trying to get everyone using Ethereum Classic.
Bob, has your position changed on whether you think the merge is actually going to happen? It seems pretty likely now, no?
Yeah, no, it's totally going to happen. A lot of people are like skeptical, whatever, it's keep getting pushed back and blah, blah, blah. But I think, anyone who has been involved with, large software engineering projects knows that happens all the time. All major software engineering projects, like, they're nearly all late, a lot harder than you thought. But what you see if you're really sort of watching what's happening on the merge and on that Ethereum protocol development is it's close. It's really, really close. There have been multiple rounds of test nets, of huge, big, long checklists of everything that needs to be done, and verification of all of these different combinations of the execution and Beacon Chain client, and now I think it was Ropsten has gone through a merge, and then next up it's Gourley happening very soon. So yeah, the merge is totally going to happen. Judging the timing, who knows? I mean, I would think it's going to be this year, but yeah, chances of it not happening, it's going to happen.
Okay, I just have a quick question for anyone can answer, either Bob or anyone. So obviously there's a lot of incentive for the miners coming from ETH after the merge, because they won't be mining ETH anymore. So obviously there's incentive for them to come and mine Ethereum Classic. But my question is, what do we have to incentivize people that are not miners to come to Ethereum Classic? People who are just using the DeFi protocols just as they are, what can we do to increase our chances of getting some of those? Because from a user's perspective, somebody who's using Ethereum, regardless of whether it's proof of stake or proof of work, what happens is you can't actually tell a difference in MetaMask or anything like that between the different protocols. So the fees might be cheaper, but there's absolutely no way to know. So there's no reason why anyone would come to Ethereum Classic without having some additional benefit other than just it's still proof of work, because I don't know how many people that's going to bring.
Well, so I think the proof of work argument really it adds value and security to people setting up projects on top of this network. Pretty much back, if you look back to kind of the cycle, 2018, 2019, we really started seeing kind of the foundation, maybe 2017, and then a couple earlier ones. But we started seeing the foundation to what we'll see built on this network. And back then, the hash rate was fairly low on Ethereum. And then what you end up seeing is that you see as this hash rate starts increasing, and there's equipment to do that via the merge is kind of the theory. Those projects will turn on, and now once you have those projects natively turning on to this network, then the end user that is using DeFi or whatever product on top of the network, there is an option for that on Ethereum Classic. Right now, you don't see that because Ethereum Classic hasn't had the hash rate to secure a material amount of value on top of the network. But that's all getting ready to change. So we're kind of entering a very big paradigm shift for the network, and it's been positioned for this for a long time. As many have said, the merge was expected years ago. So I think a lot of the people on Classic thought they would do the merge a lot sooner. That hasn't happened, but now that it's becoming a reality, a lot of the positioning and all of that is now going to happen. Or is now going to come into play. And then all of the mechanics, the economic interest and all of that is kind of set up for people to just organically kind of do what we saw on Ethereum just on Classic. And proof of work might not matter to the end user, but it certainly matters to someone that's issuing Tether on a network, or issuing a stable coin or setting up a big a big DeFi project. They want to make sure that there's a lot of hash rate securing the transactions going through, and that it's 51% resilient. And we hadn't been 51% resilient until MES and ETC hash. So we're positioned in the right spot for that. But I would just think the end user, might not see it right now, but projects will. And especially if someone like Bob is going around to conferences, talking to projects that are starting up, that are seeing success, those people will start turning on Classic. So I would just expect that. And then you'll see native ERC20 tokens, kind of just that whole cycle that you saw on ETH over the last 5 years.
Got it. So just one thing in response to that, saying that is like saying Solana, because it's proof of stake, should never have grown, never have a DeFi ecosystem. But even though it is proof of stake, people still decide to use that. And I don't like proof of stake. I have nothing for it. I don't think it's going to last very long. But they have built a much larger ecosystem than this. So to say that because people on ETH now don't there's no way to know if they would prefer proof of work or proof of stake, because if you think about it, obviously we do hope that the merge is going to bring a lot of miners and people to Ethereum Classic. But from the standpoint of someone from an outsider, for them to say that this is guaranteed to happen is a little bit of like fugazi. It doesn't. I understand, but I do think that there needs to be something more here ready for those, especially if we want the users. The miners obviously is going to be pretty clear that they're going to show up here, but the users, that's what matters. And for them to come here, we need stuff built. And at the current moment, in my opinion, I don't think we're ready. And when I say built, I mean decentralized finance. An ecosystem. The network itself and the miners and the security is absolutely flawless. It's great right now. And it's going to be much better after the merge. So it's just a question of what can we do to ensure that growth will happen, because it's not guaranteed. And to think that it's guaranteed is, in my opinion, just a little bit, not the best thing to think.
I think I can. Could I just jump in here and say I think this might be a good point to segue into the next week's discussion, because you mentioned the ecosystem updates, and there has been a lot of stuff going on. So in the interest of time, I think for this week we can wrap up soon, unless there's any other burning issues. But next week we can definitely dive into discussion about where the ecosystem's going, and to answer your questions, Wiedergarten, about the new things that are happening on Ethereum Classic right now in terms of DeFi, and some very interesting stuff going on. So please join us next week for that.
Ronan, if you wanted to answer the question after the call, we can head into the DMs, if that's okay with you.
I can be on the call next week. We can talk about it.
Okay, if you want to do that, that's fine too. Okay. Good talking to you guys.
Okay, if there are any other final things that anyone wants to jump in and say.
Cheers, everyone. Have a great week.
All right.
Thanks for joining.
Thanks for the time, Bob.
Yeah, keep up the good work, and thank you everyone for participating in this week's call. And we will see you again at the same time next week to continue part 2 of this discussion. So thanks again for joining us, and see you next time. Bye-bye.